That message changed everything. It wasn't a breakup text or bad news from work. It was from my own dad telling me they wouldn't come to my housewarming. My name is Nina, and that message changed the meaning of everything I had ever built. It read, "We're not coming to your housewarming. Your brother just moved too. No call, no apology, just one plain sentence colder than the Seattle rain." I read it twice, then replied, "That's okay, Dad." I set my phone face down on the dining table and stared at its reflection. Oak wood I had designed myself smooth and shining under the faint coastal light. Tomorrow, the Bravo crew would arrive to film the opening scene for their new design show. To everyone else, it was another career milestone, another episode in a primetime slot. But for me, it was the first time my name would appear on screen without being hidden behind someone else's. The villa around me was silent, yet every wall carried the echo of the years I had worked to reach this moment. I had planned the evening down to the smallest detail, the table setting the lighting, even the song that would play when Mom and Dad walked through the door. But now they wouldn't. Still, I didn't delete the message. I left it on my phone, proof that sometimes silence speaks louder than love. If you've ever given everything just to be seen, only to be met with silence, this story is for you. Stay until the end. You might realize that silence can be the strongest answer of all. It probably started on a gray Thanksgiving morning when I was 16. The smell of cinnamon and roasted pumpkin filled the air while my mom moved quickly between the stove and the counter, humming softly to a tune from the old radio. My dad stood nearby with his camcorder, narrating the whole scene as if we were the stars of a perfect holiday commercial. My brother Evan was in the center of it all, stirring batter with exaggerated energy, earning laughter and praise with every motion. Mom called him her holiday miracle, and Dad couldn't stop filming him. I tried to help by reaching for the mixing bowl, but Mom gently took it from my hands and said, "Sweetheart, let Evan handle that." I stepped aside and pretended not to mind. They all laughed when he spilled flour across the counter, and Dad captured every second as if it were the highlight of the day. I stood near the sink, wiping my hands, waiting for someone to notice that I had already cleaned the dishes, folded the napkins, and set the plates in perfect order. No one looked my way. Every smile, every word of affection revolved around Evan. When I suggested an idea for the centerpiece, something simple with pine cones and candles, Dad lowered the camera for a moment and glanced at me. "Don't make everything about you, Nina." His tone was calm, almost indifferent, but the words hit hard. I swallowed my response and turned away, trying to focus on the steady rhythm of the kitchen sounds. Evan made another joke about the turkey Mom clapped, and Dad resumed filming. The world around me seemed to spin perfectly without me. Later that afternoon, the house smelled like roasted vegetables and pies. I set a small gift on the dining table, a hand-painted card with a quote about gratitude. It wasn't much, but I had spent hours painting it the night before. By the time everyone sat down, the card had been pushed to the side, half hidden under a pile of magazines. Evan led the prayer that night, his voice strong and warm. When he finished with a joke about being the favorite child, laughter filled the room. I smiled with them, but a quiet ache settled somewhere deep, the kind that doesn't fade easily. Dinner passed in the same rhythm I had known for years. Dad asked Evan about school, Mom told stories about his soccer games, and I stayed quiet, offering to refill glasses or pass the dishes. The smallest gestures were my way of trying to belong, but they felt invisible. I remember thinking that silence might be easier than trying to be heard. When the plates were empty and the laughter had softened, I began clearing the table. Mom joined me for a moment, handing me a stack of plates. "You're such a good helper," she said, smiling as she turned back toward Dad to talk about Evan's college applications. Her words were kind, but they didn't land where she meant them to. Helper. That was what I had become. I washed the dishes slowly, my reflection faint in the kitchen window. Outside, the Seattle sky had turned dark, the kind of gray that swallows everything. Upstairs, Evan's voice echoed faintly as he played his guitar. I dried my hands, went to my room, and opened the small notebook I always kept under the bed. The paper smelled faintly of paint and ink. I wrote one sentence that night, the only thing I knew how to promise myself. One day, they'll remember me without me asking. 4 years later, I left Seattle with one suitcase and too many unspoken words. The morning air was damp, the kind that clings to your skin like a reminder of what you're leaving behind. My mom stood by the doorway, twisting her hands together, while my dad kept his eyes on the driveway. Evan had already hugged me a quick, distracted goodbye before heading out to meet his friends. I waited for something more, a word, a promise, but none came. When I received a full scholarship to study communications in California, I thought for the first time they would be proud. Instead, Dad frowned as if I had announced something foolish. "Communications isn't stable," he said. "You're good with details. Why not accounting or law?" Mom added softly, "It's too far, honey. You don't know anyone there." I wanted to tell her that distance might be the point, that maybe space was the only way I could breathe, but I just nodded. A week later, Evan announced that he had been accepted into an MBA program. The living room filled with excitement. Dad opened a bottle of wine and Mom started planning how to help him with his tuition. I overheard her say, "We'll cover what his scholarship doesn't." No one mentioned my scholarship or asked if I needed help moving. I smiled through the moment, holding my acceptance letter in my lap like it was invisible. In California, the sun felt brighter but lonelier. My apartment was a small studio above a laundromat that smelled faintly of detergent and steam. I spent nights editing videos for a small creative agency that barely paid enough for groceries. My meals were instant noodles, sometimes with an egg when I could afford it. I told myself it was temporary, that hunger was cheaper than asking for help. My friend Mara, a film major I met during orientation, was the only person who saw through the act. She had this quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to fill silence to make it safe. We'd sit on the roof of our building at night, sharing cheap coffee and stories about the families we left behind. "You know," she said once, "you don't have to keep earning a place in someone's life. Sometimes leaving is what saves you." Her words settled into me like sunlight through fog. During my second semester, I called home less. Conversations with Mom always drifted toward Evan, his new internship, his professor's praise, the networking events he attended. She ended every call with, "You should visit soon," though no one offered to help with the ticket. I'd hang up, stare at my reflection on the dark laptop screen, and wonder if they even noticed how much quieter I'd become. I learned to build small routines around the silence. Early mornings at the beach before class, sketching storyboards on my notebook. Late nights, color-correcting footage for clients who never remembered my name. Each project taught me something: how to balance light, how to frame a story so that even ordinary things looked meaningful. Maybe that was what I had been doing my whole life, finding beauty in being unseen. By my third year, I stopped checking family group messages. The updates were the same: Evan's promotions, Dad's weekend projects, Mom's new recipes. My own messages sat unread. It hurt less when I stopped expecting replies. When graduation came, I sent a photo of me in my cap and gown. Mom responded with a heart emoji. Dad didn't reply. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by sketches and empty takeout boxes. The city outside hummed with life I couldn't quite touch. I thought about the years spent trying to fit into a frame that was never built for me. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. By the time I turned 30, the calls finally came from the places I used to dream about. It started with a small station back in Seattle, the same city I had once left behind to find myself. I joined as an assistant producer, barely earning enough to cover rent, but for the first time in years, I felt I was exactly where I needed to be. My supervisor, Paul, a senior producer with 2 decades of local television experience, noticed how I stayed late after everyone left. He would lean against the doorway and say, "You've got the eye, Nina. Don't waste it polishing other people's work." His words stuck with me, not because they were kind, but because they sounded like permission. Under Paul's guidance, I learned the rhythm of storytelling that connected people, how to make ordinary moments look like something worth remembering. After months of working behind the camera, I proposed an idea for a short feature called Homes of the Sound, a series about the stories hidden within the coastal houses of Puget Sound. It was meant to be small, just a local filler segment, but viewers loved it. People wrote letters, sent photos of their own homes, shared memories tied to weathered walls and creaking docks. Within 6 months, the mini-series became the most watched program in its slot. When Paul retired, he handed me his old director's chair with a quiet smile. I used my savings and a grant from the station to found my own company, Northlight Media. At first, it was just me and 3 freelancers working out of a borrowed office, editing footage between coffee breaks and deadlines. We focused on documentaries about architecture, craftsmanship, and the people who shaped the spaces they lived in. The company grew fast, fueled not by investors, but by stories that felt real. 2 years later, Northlight Media won a regional award for visual storytelling. I remember standing on stage under the warm lights, hearing my name followed by applause that didn't fade too quickly. For once, I wasn't invisible. Soon after, Bravo reached out. They wanted me to direct a national series titled Open Homes USA. It was a dream disguised as a contract. The budget was massive, the schedule relentless, but every shot felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I traveled from coast to coast, meeting designers, homeowners, and dreamers who reminded me of everything I used to long for. The series became a hit, syndicated across multiple platforms, and suddenly my inbox filled with offers I used to believe were meant for someone else. When the final episode aired, I decided it was time for something personal. I bought a $12 million villa in Queen Anne, a hilltop mansion overlooking the bay, sunlight spilling across the glass walls each morning. It wasn't just a house. It was a space built from every sleepless night, every bowl of instant noodles, every quiet rejection. I turned part of it into a studio for my next project, a creative space for new artists who reminded me of the girl I used to be. As the finishing touches were made, I wrote a letter inviting Mom, Dad, and Evan to the housewarming. I imagined them walking through the marble foyers, seeing the life I had built without their applause. That night, a notification blinked on my phone, a message from Dad. "We'll skip your housewarming. Your brother just moved too." I read it twice, the words familiar in their casual cruelty. I typed my reply slowly, choosing each word with care. "That's okay, Dad." I placed the phone face down on the table and looked around the villa, every corner gleaming, every light set just right. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I had waited half my life for their approval and realized I didn't need it anymore. The next morning, the sky cleared, not my thoughts. I woke up early, unable to shake the quiet ache that had settled overnight. The message from Dad still lingered in my mind, heavy but dull, like a bruise fading under the skin. I sat at the edge of the long oak table and realized that it had been built for a family that would never sit there. Yet something in me refused to let it stay empty. If they wouldn't come, I would fill those seats myself, not with the people who had turned away, but with those who had once stood quietly beside me. I took out a notepad and began writing names. The cameraman who stayed late helping me fix a broken light on my first shoot. My neighbor who brought soup when she saw delivery boxes piling up outside my door. My old teacher who told me to keep painting even when grades said otherwise. And my Aunt Lorraine who had always remembered me even when my parents didn't. With each name, the list felt more like a memory being repaired. Later that day, I hired a local chef named Margaret. She arrived with calm confidence, asking for no introductions beyond a handshake. As we reviewed the menu, she paused and asked, "Who's the dinner for?" I told her, "For people who were never invited." She didn't question it further. She simply nodded and said, "Then it will be something worth remembering." We planned a dinner that felt honest, nothing that screamed luxury. Salmon, roasted vegetables, and a pear tart, the kind that carried warmth rather than decoration. Margaret suggested a few touches, simple and thoughtful. I told her I wanted the night to feel like a conversation that had been waiting too long to begin. When the guests arrived, there was no red carpet, no introduction, just the sound of shoes against the floor and laughter that seemed to find its place naturally. They looked surprised, touched, curious, but none asked why they were there. I welcomed each one by name, and for the first time in years I felt present, not performing. As dinner unfolded, the air grew lighter. Conversations wove together stories of lost chances, unexpected kindness, small triumphs no one had celebrated before. Lorraine leaned over and whispered, "You made something good out of nothing, sweetheart." Across the room, Margaret watched silently, her expression soft, knowing. By the time dessert was served, the space felt complete. There were no speeches, no toasts, just an understanding that this night was about being seen. When the plates emptied and the laughter settled, I stayed behind to clear the table. Each chair had been used. Each plate held proof that someone had belonged even for a few hours. I rested my hand on the smooth wood and smiled quietly. Everyone deserves a seat. By sunset, the crew had arrived, cameras, cables, and quiet expectations. I greeted them at the entrance, their polite nods and practiced smiles filling the air with that strange mix of anticipation and restraint that always comes before filming. The long table stood ready again, not as a stage, but as proof that something real had happened here. Margaret moved through the kitchen with her usual calm precision, plating the final dishes as if it were any other night. But this night was different. It wasn't about food or production or ratings. It was about a quiet truth being seen. The guests returned, the same ones who had shared that first dinner, and their presence filled the space with something steadier than applause. As the cameras started rolling, I felt no need to perform. The conversations flowed naturally. People spoke softly, laughed freely, and didn't look toward the lens for validation. A few members of the crew exchanged glances, maybe realizing this wasn't the kind of show they had expected. One of the reporters, a young woman with a notebook and unsure eyes, approached me during a pause. "What inspired this?" she asked. I didn't need to think long. "Fairness isn't decoration," I said. "It's design." She wrote it down carefully, as if the words might slip away if she didn't trap them on paper. When I looked around, I saw guests leaning toward one another, listening closely. No one interrupted. No one tried to dominate the conversation. It was the kind of balance I had been chasing for years, one built not on power, but on presence. At one point, the cameraman, an older man with silver hair, stopped filming for a moment and simply watched. Later, he told me quietly, "You don't see this often. People just being." That stayed with me longer than any compliment I'd ever received. The crew kept the setup simple. No filters, no retakes, no rearranging scenes. The lights stayed soft enough to see faces clearly, but not to erase the lines that made them human. The sound engineer whispered through his mic, "It feels alive in here." As the evening went on, I began to notice something small but beautiful, the way people met each other's eyes without hesitation. No one looked down. No one hid behind phones or excuses. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Margaret stood near the back, arms folded, watching quietly as she always did. She caught my gaze and nodded, once her look saying everything words couldn't. Gratitude, pride, and the shared knowledge that some moments don't need framing to matter. The last shot of the night captured everyone still seated, the faint hum of conversation carrying through the air. The director signaled the crew to stop recording, but no one moved. They just stayed there, caught in something real, unwilling to break it. When the lights dimmed, I stayed behind, helping gather the cables, the microphones, the leftover glasses. The air felt light, unburdened, as if the house itself had exhaled. One of the assistants thanked me for the hospitality, saying it didn't feel like work. I smiled. It hadn't felt like work for me either. For years, I had built set stories and images that looked like belonging. But tonight, for the first time, I didn't have to create it. I simply lived inside it. And for the first time, I wasn't performing. I was home. A week later, the episode aired on a rainy Seattle morning. I hadn't planned to watch it live, but the sound of distant thunder made the house feel smaller, and somehow it felt right to let it play. My phone began to vibrate long before the opening credits ended. Messages stacked on top of each other, some from colleagues, some from strangers, a few from numbers I had long deleted. Most were simple, beautiful work. Thank you for saying what no one says. Yet each one felt like a small wave touching a shore I hadn't walked in years. By mid-morning, I received a call from Aunt Lorraine. Her voice was warm, steady, the way it had always been. "You did good, sweetheart," she said. "They're facing what you carried for years." I didn't answer at first, only let her words sink in. There was no bitterness in her tone, only recognition, a kind of peace that didn't need forgiveness to exist. Later, I learned that one of Mom's neighbors had called her that morning, excited, saying, "I just saw your daughter on TV. What a wonderful project." Apparently, the conversation hadn't gone the way she expected. For hours, Mom said nothing. Then by afternoon, she posted a photo from the episode on her social media with the caption, "So proud." It spread quickly, not because of love, but because people noticed the timing. The comments filled with polite confusion. "Didn't you say she left home years ago?" Funny how pride finds its voice after the applause. My brother Evan stayed quiet for 2 days. Then someone from his office asked publicly why he hadn't been at the dinner. His answer was vague, a line about travel and scheduling conflicts. But those who had watched the episode seemed to understand more than he'd said. A few of his friends reposted clips of me speaking about belonging, adding quiet notes like "ouch" or "that must have hurt." He stopped responding altogether after that. Dad called 6 times that week. I didn't answer once. Each time the phone rang, my chest tightened, but not with anger, more like the faint pressure of an old bruise that no longer controlled me. On the 7th call, I let it go to voicemail and listened later. His voice trembled. "I saw you. You've done something good." I just then silenced a deep breath, and finally, "I'm proud, Nina." It was strange how those words, once a distant dream, arrived too late to matter, yet not too late to heal. Emails from viewers poured in. A teacher from Ohio wrote that she had used the episode to start a class discussion about fairness. A retired architect shared how the dinner reminded him of his late wife's community table project. A mother said her teenage daughter had decided to invite a lonely classmate to lunch after watching. Reading them, I realized the story had left my hands and become something else, something alive. By evening, the rain hadn't stopped. The city outside was blurred into shades of silver and gray. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching water trace paths down the glass. I thought about Mom sitting behind her screen, about Evan avoiding questions, about Dad reaching out after all these years. None of it felt like victory, not really. It felt like weather, unpredictable, cleansing, necessary. Lorraine texted again that night. "Some storms don't destroy, they reveal." I smiled, looking out at the rain that hadn't let up once all day. She was right. Some storms wash more than they ruin. 2 months later, I packed again, but this time for peace. The boxes were lighter, not because I owned less, but because I was carrying only what belonged to me. No expectations, no explanations, no ghosts from a family table that had never made room. I rented a small house in Portland near the river, a quiet place with enough light to remind me mornings could start without noise. The first night I slept without checking my phone. When I woke, I didn't feel the need to look back. A few days later, an email appeared from my brother Evan. The subject line was simple: "We should talk." I read it once, then deleted it without replying. There was no anger in that act, only clarity. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, it's protection. I had learned that the hard way. Every unanswered call, every late apology had already taught me what peace required: distance. Work followed me gently, not like before when ambition had teeth. Bravo reached out again, asking if I would return for a second season of the Table Project. The message was warm, the tone respectful. I hesitated, then typed slowly, yes. But this time, no family, just stories. They agreed immediately. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in my career, I wasn't chasing recognition. I was choosing alignment. Days in Portland settled into a rhythm that felt almost meditative. I'd wake early, walk along the riverside path, and watch the water catch the light. My thoughts no longer spiraled around unfinished conversations or words I wished I'd said. They simply floated like driftwood, free from direction, yet still moving forward. Margaret called once to check in, saying the new season's theme, belonging without permission, was already being discussed. I told her it fit. She laughed, understanding without needing me to explain. Sometimes I'd pass small restaurants or coffee shops and see families inside, people talking over shared meals, their faces glowing with something I couldn't name anymore. But instead of envy, I felt relief. I no longer measured my worth by where I wasn't invited. The quiet I had built was steady, not fragile, and I guarded it with the kind of gentleness that comes only after breaking. Letters from viewers still arrived, forwarded from the production office. One woman wrote that she had started hosting table nights for her neighbors just to remind herself that kindness doesn't require blood. Another said she had forgiven her mother, but only after realizing forgiveness didn't mean returning. Each story was a reminder that what began as a show had become something deeper, a map for people finding their way back to themselves. As autumn came, the city turned gold and slow. I spent my evenings by the window, sometimes editing scripts, sometimes doing nothing at all. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt earned. I didn't need closure from Mom or Dad or an apology from Evan. Their silence no longer echoed. It simply existed, like the sound of wind moving through leaves, present but no longer personal. Peace, I realized, isn't found in reconciliation. It's found in release. It isn't about forgiving those who hurt you so they can sleep better at night. It's about forgiving yourself for waiting so long to stop trying. One morning, I brewed coffee and watched the river drift past, slow and certain. My phone buzzed again, another message from a network producer asking for an early meeting. I smiled, muted the notification, and took another sip. Not everything deserved a reply. For years, I'd built tables hoping others would sit beside me. Now, I finally understood. Peace isn't found at their table, I built my own. Sometimes distance is the only language love understands. You don't owe anyone access to your peace, not even family. The quiet life you build after rejection is the loudest proof of self-worth. If they don't clap for you, clap for yourself and keep walking. The strength to leave doesn't mean the absence of love. It means choosing the kind that doesn't hurt. Sometimes peace isn't given, it's built one boundary at a time. Thank you for listening until the end. If Nina's story reminded you of your own, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Your words might help someone else find theirs. Remember, healing doesn't always come from apology. Sometimes it comes from silence. Subscribe if you believe peace is worth protecting, even when love costs too much.